Alrighty, we're doing this without live video of me today. Just my little happy avatar and some screen shares. Before we actually begin, you'll undoubtedly want access to the text. I am going to pull them up on screen share, but always better if you have access to them, probably at a more tangible level, so to speak. And I am not going to read either of these. So if you haven't done so, if you didn't do so pretty much right before starting the video, just pause the video here for a minute and read through these. And we will do the poem first and then the bit of microfiction. All right. So we have Pantoun for Chinese women. And the spelling of Pantoun in the title is a variation. It's usually spelled with an M at the end, and it is what we call a traditional form poem, um, which is to say traditional. It comes from the Malaysian culture, and form because there are a lot of rules that dictate how um, the lines work and are repeated. Okay. And again, if you didn't read this aloud, stop again and read it out loud, because the repetition of lines and the rhythms that creates and other sonic elements in this poem carry a lot of power and a lot of emotional weight. All right, thinking a little bit more about that, about the form of this. One thing that is not part of the Pantoum form is the epigraph, and epigraph literally means above writing. It is usually a quotation that has somehow instigated the writing of the poem. It's the author read this quotation and somehow it has inspired or caused them to address the subject matter of the quote. And here we have from the People's Peak Daily from Peking, March 3rd, 1983. At present, the phenomena of butchering, drowning, and leaving to die female infants have been very serious. In 1983, okay. Um, China's one-child policy, which was a response to booming population growth after World War II, was put in place in 1979 and lasted until 2015. So this is 4 years into that policy, all right? And as we learned the other day, male children are particularly valued in Chinese culture. It's common in lots and lots of cultures, but the Chinese place tons of emphasis on male children to continue the family name, to carry on the father's business or work, right? So when they instituted the one child policy, of course, the less important female infants were the ones who were butchered, drowned, and left to die, right? To put it quite bluntly. Okay, so there's our epigraph. And then we move into the poem. We have 8 4-line stanzas for a total of 32 lines. And there's a repetition pattern in the lines. The lines are not verbatim. That is to say, there are minor changes in some of the lines, But you would quickly recognize that the second line of the first stanza becomes the first line of the next stanza. And then the second line of the second stanza becomes the first line of the third stanza. And that's one set of repetition. The other set of repetition, the last line of a stanza becomes the third line of the following stanza. So the second and fourth lines become the first and third lines of the next stanza. They shift up one position in their repetition, which means, of course, that is there in fact a new line in every stanza? Yeah, the last one, but it gets repeated in the next one. So eventually, every line is heard at least twice, except one line in the whole poem, and that is the second line of the last stanza. The last line of the last stanza is the same as the very first line in the poem, creating what's known as a frame, right? Everything in between falls between the repetition of the very first and very last lines. Okay, and again, this creates a sense of rhythm, along with the fact that the lines are all approximately the same length, the same syllable count, right? Um, that becomes very, very powerful. Okay. So we're just going to kind of take content apart here. The there's no, the tone is super somber. There is no humor in today's reading. Sorry, it's a downer, but that's just kind of how it is. They say a child with two mouths is no good. And there we have our first metaphor, two mouths. Okay. And then we get a descriptor of the first mouth. In the slippery, wet, a hollow space, smooth, gumming, echoing wide for food. And this, of course, is the facial mouth. Then we get the line, no wonder my man is not here at his place. And here, presumably, and it's not evident on the first reading, but presumably that place is by the mother's side. We have just given birth to a child. And this would only, of course, be for home births. Most Chinese births actually happen Western style in hospitals, and the husband's not even admitted to the birthing room. Um, Very kind of a sterile atmosphere, kind of like the one I was born into. My father was paced around a waiting room while I was being born, and then they brought me out and held me up to the glass. Right. That's the way Chinese medicine is. This was American medicine in the 1950s and early 60s, right? And then, of course, things lightened up a little bit and men got more involved. But but presumably this would be by the mother's side. We've just given birth. It's a happy occasion in our family. Father and mother are side by side with the newborn infant. But no wonder my man is not here at his place. And this comes after the descriptor of the mouth as echoing wide for food. This suggests that maybe the man has another role right now. Um, we find out later what that role is. But even otherwise, it would be he is out working to provide for a new addition to the family. Okay. Then we begin the second stanza, repeated line. In the slippery, wet, a hollow space, a slit narrowly sheathed within its hood. And this, of course, is the vaginal mouth. No wonder my man is not here at his place. Now we've got the man has a role to fulfill in relation to this new addition to the family. And then a colon, which of course announces what he is doing. He is digging for the dragon jar of soot. Okay. In this line, we are given an action. He is digging for a dragon jar of soot. And we need to kind of take apart the dragon jar here. Western culture has dragons as malicious, evil monsters, right? This is not the case in Chinese culture, where dragons represent good luck, protection, intelligence. And in Buddhism, the Chinese dragon is called a Naga, and they are associated with water and weather. And as such, they are sacred to farmers in particular, right? They also represent male energy, the yang of the yin and yang. So we have a dragon jar, a ceramic jar with a dragon on it. And that dragon is not necessarily inherently negative, right? It's male and it's revered and it's associated with farmers. And this might suggest the sort of socioeconomic status of the family unit that we're looking at here. Not wealthy, but subsistence farmer type people. And they're not going to have access to adoption for their child, right? Now, the dragon jar itself, dragon jars were used in ceremonies and they were used in celebrations of noblemen, of kings, right? So the dragon jar itself was a receptacle used for ceremony. And here's this poor family has a dragon jar, okay, for whatever reason, and it is being used in a ceremonial manner to gather soot. Okay. And then we move into the third stanza. Again, a repeated line, but a little bit different. That slit narrowly sheathed within its hood, exclamation point, right? The thing that determines the feminine, the female nature of the child. Exclamation point. Specific a lot of attention is being brought to the female, the femininity of the child. His mother, new character gets introduced, squatting, coughs by the fire's blaze. Okay. Another female. We now have we have four characters in this poem, right? We have the narrator, the I pronoun, presumably the mother. We have my man, the father. We have his mother, and of course, we have the child, who is only labeled, by the way, as the child, and then through the other descriptors as female. Now, the mother is from a generation where life is revered more generally, right? Um, she's from a generation where children would be welcomed into the family regardless of their gender. A male child would obviously get particular special attention, but she is from before the one child policy, before communism, probably even. Um, so she coughs by the fire's blaze, which might indicate her dissatisfaction with what's going on, maybe. Or it might also be that she's sitting close to the fire, and as the man digs, he is kicking up soot and she is inhaling it, and it makes her cough. Okay, it could be a physical response to soot that may or may not become important as the poem progresses. She coughs by the fire's blaze while he digs for the dragon jar of soot. We had saved ashes for 100 days. Okay. This is another thing where we need a little bit of cultural context. There's a traditional 100-day mourning period, 100-day mourning period in Chinese burial custom. After someone dies, they are mourned for 100 days. In this poem, they have saved ashes for 100 days before a birth. Essentially, they did not know if they were going to have a male or female child, but they began mourning it 100 days before it was born. Okay. Pretty sure that's how come the 100 days is important here. Um, And that 100 days is believed to be the time it takes someone's soul to be reborn as another person, right? And Buddhists believe in reincarnation. It takes 100 days for the soul to find its way through the afterlife and into a new body. Okay. Maybe they're hoping for a quick turnaround for the child. Again, they're using a ceremonial job. They're observing a mourning period. They are treating this with respect, essentially. His mother, squatting, coughs by the fire's blaze. The child kicks against me, mewing like a flute. Okay, here we have a simile, mewing like a flute. Excuse me, this is why I'm not at school today. Um, Mewing, of course, is a sound we associate with kittens, right? Something a little bit less than human, and a flute, also something, an inanimate object. And once again, it's the child kicks against me. No name, no baby, even child, right? That kind of objectification that is necessary for them emotionally to carry through with what they have to do. We had saved ashes for 100 days, knowing if the time came that we would. No explanation of what the would is, but we know from the context of the 100-day thing and the female child what that is, right? The child kicks against me like a flute through its two weak mouths. His mother prays, knowing when the time comes that we would, for broken clay is never set in glaze. Okay. And this is an interesting line, for broken clay is never set in glaze, because clay, until it is fired, is soft and malleable and easily broken. And even the firing, the initial firing process, which is what's called a bisque firing, hardens the clay but does not protect it. Right? It's still very susceptible to moisture and water. It absorbs water and becomes fragile all over again. Can even be reclaimed at that point. Um, but broken clay is never set in glaze. And even in Judeo-Christian mythology, there is the the clay vessel, right? um, where men are made of clay, of earth. So that's part of what's going on there. I don't think I think that's probably common in many cultures. I do not know, but even Judeo-Christian mythology has the idea of the clay vessel as a human body. Through her two weak mouths, his mother prays. She will not pluck the rooster nor serve its blood, for broken clay is never set in glaze. Okay, roosters. Someplace. Where's my note about roosters here? La 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 la. Roosters were used for ceremonial purposes. Hey gosh, I apparently read this and never wrote it down. But they were sometimes sacrificed to honor the gods, to protect against evil, and to bring luck. But here a rooster will not be sacrificed. Okay. Um, there is no protection for what's about to happen. There is no luck for this child, right? For broken clay is never set in glaze. Women are made of river sand and wood. Okay, so here we have again not associated with the child, but women in a more general sense are made of river sand and wood. And both of these, of course, are water type images. Rivers tend to represent, among other things, journeys. And river sand, of course, is constantly shifting, being carried by the currents. And in that regard, it seems to relate to the idea of broken clay never being set, right? It's in constant motion, constant turmoil, seeking a destination somewhere downstream. And wood, which of course is an impermanent substance as well. It floats, it gets waterlogged, it sinks, it rots, it decays, it goes back to being earth and dirt all over again. So the idea of impermanence associated with women, and again, it's male children that are valued to carry on family name and family business and family tradition, not the women, right? Their impermanence, so to speak, is more tangible than male impermanence, right? So women are made of river sand and wood. She will not pluck the rooster nor serve its blood. My husband frowns, pretending in his haste women are made of river sand and wood. Okay. We're back to the father very specifically. He frowns. Nobody's real happy about what's happening here. Um, but it is something they view as necessity. And he is trying to do this fast, right? Perhaps to um, minimize the suffering of the child, perhaps to minimize the emotional suffering of the mother and his mother and himself, right? This has to be done, but let's do it quick and try to forget about it, kind of a thing. And he is pretending that women are made of river sand and wood, that they are somehow less consequential than a male child would be. Milk soaks the bedding. I cannot bear the waste. These are the mother's words. Apparently, the child is now gone. All right, there is no child to drink the milk anymore. I this might somehow represent a form of postpartum depression. The body has just had a baby and it is responding in the natural way that bodies do, but the baby is not there. I cannot bear the waste. This sounds like an emotional response to the physicality of what is happening, right? My husband frowns, pretending in his haste. We're in the last stanza. That's the first line again. My husband frowns, pretending in his haste. Okay, apparently the child has already been killed. We do not know the mode of execution, right? But we do have this notion of river, sand, and wood that implies water. The child might have been drowned. We also have another possibility, of course, with the soot and the coughing mother. Um, it is there is a form of punishment in one culture, at least, that uses soot as a tool of execution. Um, Blow it into the lungs and it coats the lungs and the person suffocates, essentially drowns on soot. I don't really think that's what happens here, though. I don't know if the child is simply suffocated, a hand over the mouth and nose, if it's physically drowned in water, because water plays a big role in some Chinese culture. But after this pretending in his haste line again, it says, "Oh, clean the girl, dress her in ashy soot." And this seems to be the role of the soot here. In Chinese burial customs, people are frequently cremated, but they are prepared for cremation, laid out naked on the earth, right? So the soot might represent this sort of crossover medium, part earth, part fire, right? Where the fire is meant to release the soul so that it can be reborn. And the earth, of course, is the grounding in life, the respect for life itself. So I think that the soot is, in fact, a dressing for the body that is meant to somehow create a channel, if you will, from life to the afterlife. And of course, I'm perfectly speculating here. I could find nothing specific about the use of soot in Chinese burial. I'm speculating based on what I did find about cremation and about dressing bodies and about fire, right? Um, so that's kind of where we're at. And then we get the next to the last line, the penultimate line. Milk soaks our bedding. I cannot bear the waste. And that line has a change in it from the bedding to our bedding. And of course, that implies the husband, the wife. And of course, in a poor family where there aren't a lot of beds, the child would have slept in the family bed for a significant length of time, right? And it's now our bedding. I cannot bear the waste. And this would tend to indicate an emotional breakdown on the part of the mother at this point. Um, it's become too much. Her child's dead. They've buried it probably within a day of its birth, essentially. Um, and she breaks down. And then back to the very first line of the poem, they say a child with two mouths is no good. That objectification, metaphorical descriptor, a way to somehow distance themselves from the reality of what they have done and convince themselves of the absolute necessity of what they have done. Interesting thing about that line is it's actually even delivered sort of tangentially. It doesn't say that a child with two mouths is no good. It says they say a child with two mouths is no good. It's delivered by a kind of a non-specific third person. And the they, of course, could refer to the government mandate that says you can only have one child. It's not just society at this point. It might be very specifically focused on blaming the one child policy for what has happened. And again, a way of relieving personal responsibility and guilt about what has happened within the home. Tough, tough poem, but a reality for far too many Chinese families, no doubt. As Matthew noted the other day in class, many children were simply abandoned because they could not go through with what this family did. This family attempted to treat the child with as much respect as possible. They attempted to give it the opportunity within their traditional religious system to be reborn, to find life somewhere downstream in the big, river of reincarnation. They tried to do it as right as they possibly could and bear the emotional responsibility and burden of that action. A lot of people apparently didn't do that. They just took the baby out and left it by the road. There's a lot of courage in this poem, actually. All right, enough of that. So we get to our microfiction story. And once again, if you didn't read it, haven't read it very, very recently, this might be a good time to pause the video, give it a read. It's not long. Once again, I'll pretty much read all of it, but not as a story, but sort of line by line as we go. In the quiz, I provided a general definition of irony. Um, there is so much irony in this. Some of it can be specifically labeled as verbal or situational, even dramatic irony. But just in a general kind of way, what happens at the end of this story is not what one would expect at the outset. That would be situational irony. But there are all these little things that just don't seem to add up right. And it's there's no humor in this one either, by the way. I'm laughing at the irony context of some of the individual parts of it, um, but they're really not funny. They're just wrong. They're just wrong. And maybe that's where we get the true story of Mr. and Mrs. Wong. Mrs. Wong bore Mr. Wong four children, all girls. Okay, right away, we know that in traditional Chinese culture, male children are valued. Okay, but here we've got four girls. One after another, they dropped out like purple plums. Okay, one after another. So we know that they came in rapid succession. You can have a baby every 10 months, right? Um, so they dropped out like purple plums, and that's kind of, I guess you could say that's kind of amusing. Um, Plums, by the way, symbolize the value of patience and the importance of remaining calm during challenging times. That's fruit plums, right? The kind that would be purple. And then purple in China symbolizes strength, love, and spiritual awareness. So right away, there's this sort of incongruity between how female children are subvalued and the symbolism associated with purple plums. Now, Mr. Wong is not an impatient man, so maybe the plum, the idea that it symbolizes the value of patience. He starts out, he wants to honor his Chinese traditions, his ancestors, his he wants to do this, right? And he tries to be patient. Years passed. Right? His wife has quit having children for whatever reason, and we are not, no light is shed on that. And then one night, after long hours at the restaurant and a bad gambling bout, Mr. Wong came home drunk. Okay, so years of waiting have taken a toll on Mr. Wong. Okay. He's tried to be patient. He's tried to remain calm during the challenging times of no male children, but it's worn him down. And we know he has a restaurant now too, by the way. But he's also got a bad gambling habit and came home drunk. So he's developed some issues. Um, and the gambling habit, betting on those male children happening someday. And he just keeps losing because there are no more children. Hard to say exactly if there's a connection there. Again, lots of times in something this short, the simple fact that reference is used to gambling seems appropriate to speculate about it, right? There's just not much here to work with. So why are the details that are here? Gambling, yeah, he's starting to take risks, perhaps. He's drinking, he's getting drunk. And he kicked the bedstead and shouted. More behavior that is not patient, that is not calm in the face of adversity. What do you get from a rotten turtle's womb but rotten turtle eggs? And here, of course, we have a metaphor for the wife. The Mrs. Wong is, in fact, the rotten turtle, right? The rotten turtle's womb, but rotten turtle eggs. And these are, again, his daughters, right? They've gone from being these symbols of strength, love, and spiritual awareness to rotten little turtles. And I didn't look up turtles in Chinese culture, and I'm suddenly regretting that because I bet there's something there. So in the next 2 years, he quickly married three girls off to a missionary, a shell-shocked ex-Marine, and an anthropologist. Interesting list because there's no real rhyme or reason to it, right? A missionary, and that one seems particularly poignant. It's the first item in the list, and of course, a missionary suggests something not of the traditional Chinese religion or culture, right? A missionary, a Christian missionary. off to do God's bidding is some remote, faraway place. So the first child gets married outside of the tradition, right? A shell-shocked ex-Marine, shell-shock, of course, PTSD, shell-shock. He's been away to war. He comes back. He's not right. And an anthropologist, a scientist. Three very, very different people, at least one of whom is definitely outside the cultural expectations of the Mr. Wong. And then the youngest ran away to Hollywood and became a successful sound specialist. The one child that does not rely on her father for placement in a marriage um, turns out to be successful. Not Mr. Wong's idea of success, which is a male child to carry on the family restaurant business, but successful just the same. But that child had to become independent to do that. The others, they got married off, and we never hear of them again. Okay. Interesting things that happen. And again, that little 3-item list says an awful lot about how much Mr. Wong really cares about his girls. He just wants to get rid of them, to eliminate them from his reality. The fourth one did him a favor by running away. Right? He didn't have to worry about marrying her off. Um, Interesting, weird things there. Mr. Wong continues. Mr. Wong said to Mrs. Wong, "Look what happened to my progeny. Look what happened to them." Well, he is responsible for that, actually, right? He married them off to very disparate people and made one run away. Look what happened to my progeny. My ancestors in heaven are ashamed. And again, he has this desire to fulfill his traditional Chinese role and obligation to please his ancestors. He says they're ashamed. I am a rich man now. Okay, so he's himself is personally successful despite his children. All the Chinese restaurants in San Jose are named Wong, yet you couldn't offer me a healthy son. That's a weird sort of shift in logic. There's a type of logic error called a non sequitur. It means it does not follow logically. And we make this leap from I am rich. All the Chinese restaurants in San Jose are named Wong, presumably the source of his wealth, to yet you couldn't offer me a healthy son. And again, we have to know that little bit about male children. We're supposed to carry on the family name and the family business. So, what he's really missing in a son is someone to carry on his successes in the restaurant world. I must change my fate, buy myself a new woman. Okay. All right. That's, um, again, maybe that whole undervaluing of women allows that to happen in Chinese culture. I'm not particularly certain. It sounds oddly westernized somehow, though. Perhaps he is starting to move away at this point in the story from what would have been a typical Chinese response, right? I don't know. She must have fresh eggs, white and strong. Fresh eggs. So he plans on keeping on trying for that male child. But these eggs no longer are Chinese. They're white. Okay. Now, white, of course, is associated with purity. It's not necessarily the color of one's skin that he is referring to, but the idea of contrast to those rotten turtle eggs. They're not green, they're white. They're not putrid, they're pure. Right? Interesting, weird, almost Aryan concept happening there. And strong, because they need to thrive in the world. They're getting a late start. His daughters are already adults, right? Now he might have married them off kind of young, but one of them ran away and became successful on her own. So, and that was the youngest one. So they're adults. These new children that he wants, they're getting a late start. So they have to be strong. So Mr. Wong divorced Mrs. Wong. And again, this is a point I should have looked up divorce in China. I don't think it probably happens a whole lot. Um, Maybe found a mistress, right? But I rather suspect that divorce in China is not popular. But Mr. Wong is in San Jose, California now, and he is becoming Americanized, so to speak. He is divorcing. He gave her a meager settlement. Okay, didn't he's a rich man. He could have treated her better, undoubtedly, and he sent her back to Hong Kong, where she lived to a ripe old age as the city's corpse beautician. And this was part of, I am pretty sure some of this came up on a quiz question. Old age is venerated in China. Okay. Old people are perceived to possess wisdom and the intelligence that goes with that wisdom. So when she lives to a ripe old age in Hong Kong, she gets a degree of respect that Mr. Wong does not hold for himself. So there's some irony there. And she becomes the city's corpse beautician. And again, Chinese funeral rites, um, or Chinese respect their ancestors. They respect the dead just like they respect the living, right? And she beautifies dead people. So she is actually becomes a kind of an embodied. She is the of the two characters, Mr. and Mrs. Wong. Mrs. Wong is the one that is respecting Chinese tradition, respecting the dead, um, helping these people on their way to a better afterlife and reincarnation. And Mr. Wong he seems to think it's a punishment somehow, right? Mr. Wong, who only wanted to please his ancestors, ships his wife back to Hong Kong out of disgust, and he probably has nothing to do with her becoming a beautician. I'm sure he divorced himself of her entirely. That was entirely her doing. But again, there's this notion of what one might expect. She goes back and lives off her pension and dies a ragged old lady, right? Is not what happens. She goes back, she lives to a ripe, respected old age, and she is the one venerating the dead. Go, Mrs. Wong. And then again, we don't really have a solid time reference for this, but 2 years ago, Mr. Wong became a born again Christian. This is the sentence that starts the story's last paragraph. Mr. Wong, who wanted to do nothing more than respect his traditional Chinese background, becomes a born again Christian. He just forsook everything, right? He now loves his new wife, whose name is Mrs. Fuller Wong. Okay. His previous wife, he subjugated her, right? She had no rights in the household. His new wife doesn't even take his name fully. She becomes Mrs. Fuller Wong. And Fuller Wong might indicate that she's the bigger, better, new, and improved version of the old Mrs. Wong. She's Fuller, right? Or it could just be that she's hyphenated. She doesn't accept his name completely, right? Only partially does she accept his name. So that's a play against what Mr. Wong's initial motivations and impetus might have been. At first, she couldn't conceive. Okay, uh-oh, because this is why he married her, right? And to have children, and at first she couldn't. Then the good Lord performed a miracle and removed 3 large polyps from her womb. And and bless me, Lord, we survived when when God destroyed our mobile home in that tornado, right? This is that kind of mentality that denies science. The doctor did not remove those polyps. Medical technology did not remove those polyps. God reached down from heaven and removed 3 large polyps from her womb. Okay, so I guess there is some humor in this, particularly if you're a cynical person like me. Um, but 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 yeah, legalism and the difference between faith and just I'm not a faithless person or anything, but uh, science is science, damn it, and God's not responsible for everything that happens. Yeah, and of course, Mr. Wong has gone from, and the Chinese are interestingly science-minded people, aren't they? They're practical. And Mr. Wong has completely forsaken that. And all of a sudden, Chinese medicine has a history that goes back way longer than traditional Western medicine does. And yet it's God that removes the polyps. So Mr. Wong is just not there anymore. She would bear Mr. Wong 3 healthy sons who would all become corporate tax accountants. Mr. Wong gets part of what he wanted. He gets 3 healthy sons. And presumably, even within Western culture, those sons have the last name Wong. We're not told if they're hyphenated too. It would be typical in our culture for those 3 sons to be named Wong. But do any of them take over the restaurant business? No. That restaurant business apparently is probably sold upon Mr. Wong's death to some external investor, and the name on those restaurants is no longer Wong. It's probably, Hibachi Express, um, but they do not completely fulfill the destiny that Mr. Wong wanted when he divorced the first wife and gave up the basis of his desires. Didn't give up on his desires. He still wanted those sons, but the reason that he wanted them, the motivator is gone. And maybe that's why they don't do what they're supposed to do, so to speak. I don't know. Again, really a kind of a delightful little story, but maybe one where we're supposed to focus on the idea of we can start out with perfectly good, legitimate reasons for wanting something, but if we want it too bad and we give up on the basis of those convictions, the basis of our motivations, we're still going to end up unfulfilled somehow. Right? Mr. Wong can't be really happy at the end of this story, I don't think. He's happy in a new kind of a way, but it's not what he originally wanted. And I suspect that somewhere inside he is perfectly aware of that. All right. All right. So that's enough of our works for today. We're going into spring break, and I'm sorry I'm not there, but you have the background materials for the essay. I will probably not be adding more material to the folders for those. I'm sitting here with a stack of poetry books next to me. It's like a foot and a half high. But for the last week, I've been just surviving on a day-to-day basis. And I think that there's plenty of material there. You just have to kind of select. I'd love to see some of you working with poems. Most of you probably will work with a short story because that's what you grew up with and that's what you're comfortable with. And they do, in fact, tend to offer a little bit more in terms of analytical potential than a poem does. Um, not that we know a poem can't have lots of different thematic potential, like spam, leaves, and aftertaste. You could have gone like 8 different ways with the thematic analysis of that poem, right? Poems are not necessarily limited, but you've grown up reading stories and having stories read to you, and therefore you have a more inherent sense of how stories work and how they build ideas. Most of you don't have I'm pretty sure that when I asked how many people read poetry for pleasure at the beginning of the semester, there was like one person that raised their hand. So most of you will probably work with a story. For some of you, music is very important in your lives. So you'll choose to work with a song. Some of you might be into the theater. We might have a few burgeoning actors or techies in our class. And in that case, you might choose to focus on a short play. Kind of like stories, they offer quite a bit of thematic potential because they are a little bit longer. There's one short play in particular that's on the list. What's the name of Naked Lunch? Um, that I can think of at least 2 or 3 really disparate arguments that could make about what's going on in that play. And the works are there. They're all in that folder except for songs, which you get to pick yourself. And I'll one more time say, if you're going to do a song, don't pick something that is too obvious. Songs are meant for instant consumption, right? Um, Now some songs are not. You have to listen to them over and over before you really get a feel for them. But the kind of songs that frequently become popular are superficial. You get it, right? Because you hear it once on the radio and you're like, yeah, yeah, I get that song. That type of song is probably not ripe for analysis. Okay. Really good songs do make it to the radio, like anything by Pink Floyd. Um, uh, some Led Zeppelin songs. I mean, the good songs are out there, and there are complicated songs out there, even perky, jumpy, um, danceable kinds of things. Some of them have very complex lyrics with lots of symbology and some metaphorical and simile content and all sorts of good stuff going on. But lots of songs are superficial. So be aware if you pick a song, not to pick something that's too simple, too direct, too easy. All right. Give yourself a challenge when you do this. The other thing I want to talk about today is midterm grade reporting. And as of the quiz that ends at class time today, all the grades that I am going to have available to me to do midterm grade reporting are in. I went through this morning and I dropped a low quiz score, and we have no attendance score for today. So once I fill in the blanks for the people that did not take today's quiz, I will be able to determine um, course grades, right? And I'm gonna go really fast to our class. And I know you can't see me doing this because I'm not screen sharing, but what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna go to grades. And basically, we have next to nothing available for me to do this. We have attendance is worth 10% of our course grade, and quizzes are worth 15%. And we are on what, quiz 8 or 9 out of 14. So we have maybe 8 or 9% of the quiz score of the course grade associated with quizzes and approximately half of the 10% attendance. So we have 5 and maybe 9. And I'll figure out that percentage a little bit more carefully before I do grade reporting. We have less than 15% of the course grade on the table at this point. So whatever your course grade comes out as, the general admonition here is treat it with a grain of salt. If it's low, there's a lot of grade ahead where that could change. If it's high, don't get overconfident because there's a lot of course grade ahead where that could change. Right. So, midterm grade reporting is meant as a counseling tool. Perhaps what's more important at this point is to think of it as a trend. If you have a non-passing grade at this point, you might want to rethink your overall sort of course strategy, right? Because the quizzes have been really easy in attendance. All you have to do is occupy a desk. And if you're not passing at this point, um, something about the way you're approaching the course might be errant. You might want to rethink that. Okay. Um, on the other hand, if you are one of those people who is a strong writer and you have some tech experience making videos, maybe you've kind of neglected the whole attendance and reading thing because you know that you are probably going to fare reasonably well in the other parts of the course, but you're still going to suffer deductions due to attendance and poor quiz scores, right? So just be aware that what is here is not much of an indicator of what's going to happen at the end of the semester for anybody. Okay. But it might indicate a trend for you, and only you can kind of do some self analysis of what's going on and decide if you want that to change or not. All right. I will also include attendance figures for everybody. How many absences do you have at this point in time? And I take a quick look. 6, 8, 10. We have 10 class meetings under our belt right now. So if you've missed 6, maybe you want to start showing up for class a little bit more, right? And by the way, if anyone gets a grade below a C, um, it's you can get a D in this course. It's not a not passing grade, but anybody who is below a C right now, I have an option to request um, that your advisor contact you and kind of talk about where you're at. And I would do that. And if you get a non-passing grade, something below a D, the algorithm automatically flags your advisor to talk to you. So be aware that this is a counseling tool, and they want us to indicate people that may be having an issue because they want you all to pass. They want you back. Um, they don't want you to fail your English lit class and have to take it again and slow down your degree process. They don't want you to get discouraged and drop out. Um, are the university's motivations pure and wonderful? I have doubts, right? It's about retention and it's about cash flow and tuition. But but this is a counseling tool, is what midterm grade reporting really is. And I will tell in the report exactly what percentage of the course grade is being used, exactly what your average, well, give or take a decimal point or two, exactly what your average is right now. And I will report the number of absences you have had so far this semester. So that's what's going to happen. And that might happen later today. It might happen tomorrow. We'll see. But okay, that's enough of this for today. Let me get back to my Zoom tab. And if, of course, you have questions at any point, I am going to take 2 days, probably at the beginning of break when the weather is good, and I am going to not do any schoolwork. Other than that, I will be logged into D2L every day. I will see your emails. I will answer your questions. Feel free to ask them. All righty. I will see you on March 11th, I believe. March 11th is our next class meeting. So I will see you on March 11th.